That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And we've got to be feeling good this week. It was a great week for the Chicago Bears, a great victory over the Dallas Cowboys, and a great game for Caleb Williams. As for Bears Banter, better late than never. I apologize, this one getting out a little bit later in the week. We had some travel things we had to take care of Monday, Tuesday, some family stuff. Got that taken care of, got that out of the way. Still wanted to do a podcast this week. Of course, the Raiders coming up this weekend. So we're going to do a little bit more of a previewy type thing since we're out a little bit later in the week. We're going to have Jason Fitz on from Yahoo Sports. You may know him from ESPN, Sirius XM before that. I like Jay. I think he always provides a great conversation, and he is a big Raiders fan. So he has been on this podcast multiple times in the past. We usually have him on right before the Bears play the Raiders, which if you know anything about the NFL schedule, they should be playing the Raiders once every 4 years, but it certainly is more frequently than that. I haven't looked it up, but for whatever the reason with that 17th game, somehow the Raiders end up on this schedule more often than not, as they did this year, because this is an AFC North year and the Raiders are once again the Bears' bonus AFC opponent with that unbalanced 17-game schedule. So apologize for the late podcast, but we're going to get this in anyway. And for those of you who were hopeful there wouldn't be a podcast from me this week because you don't like me and find me obnoxious, well, you're listening right now, so I must be doing something right. So thank you for you listening as well. Now, let's jump into this. I'm not going to start with Caleb Williams. I'm actually going to start with Matt Eberflus. And I know there's plenty of Bears fans out there that, say, all right, enough with Eberflus. He's been gone since the middle of last season. We don't need to talk about him anymore. And we don't need to talk about him anymore. And that is absolutely fantastic for every Bears fan. There are still a few defenders of Matt Eberflus out there, which I find really comical because I do think genuinely, truly, he's one of the worst head coaches in the history of the NFL. Now, I know that's a little hyperbolic because I don't know about some coach from 1948 that, coached 3 years and went, 2-27 or something. Like, I understand that there are certain, but in the modern era, when you're looking at these, and, there's names like Richie Kotite and certain people, that NFL media like to bring up in terms of these all-time bad head coaches. Matt Eberflus is on that list. And the way they handled Caleb Williams, the way he established a culture that never really existed, the way he was cheesy with the players, the hits principle, which to me is just silly high school crap. I understand the Bears did it in the Lovey era with Rod Marinelli, but I am not into that. I do not think adults find that at all motivating or at all something to adhere to. I think it's just a bunch of words on a piece of paper, painted up on a wall that really mean nothing. I think it's about accountability with the coaching staff. And that's what I love about Ben Johnson. When you compare and contrast Matt Eberflus and Ben Johnson and the way they handle things in a press conference, it's really a reflection of how they're handling things in the locker room. And if you've listened to this podcast over the last few years, how often did you hear me talk about Matt Eberflus's press conferences? I did it all the time. And it's not just because it was coach speak, right? There's plenty of coaches that do coach speak. We'll get them next time. We got to take it one game at a time. And it's cliche. There's plenty that do it. And it's annoying and it's frustrating, but it's not a big deal. What the big deal for Matt Eberflus was, and it finally really started getting talked about. I started talking about this in 2022 and in 2023. And, I'll pat myself on the back for being a little ahead of the curve there. I'm not saying I was the only one talking about it, but it didn't really start getting a lot of play until 2024. And it really was around the Hail Mary game, the accountability in press conferences, because Matt Eberflus had none. He had none. And in fact, in weird opportunities, he'd find ways to pat himself on the back in those press conferences. And I don't know if that's a lack of confidence, if he's had to do that publicly to make himself feel better. Maybe he thought he was being funny. I don't know what the situation was, but when you're consistently going up there and they basically, as the media say, why did you lose this game? And Matt Eberflus's consistent message was, we just need to execute better. He didn't say, a lot of times like Bill Belichick, as much as Bill Belichick, and we poke fun at how he handles press conferences, when he'd grumble up there with the Patriots after a bad loss, it was players need to play better, coaches need to coach better. And that's what he basically did. It was like 5 words, and then he'd move on to the next question. He didn't get into any details. He was annoying with that. The media, whatever with it. But again, there was at least a level of accountability with the coaches. He didn't point his finger at the players. He said everybody needs to be better. But when you got to Matt Eberflus, and his consistent message was, we need to execute better. Now, when you break that apart, and you should, because the players do, you're damn well the players are listening to that. So when the players hear, we just need to execute better, that is the coach standing up in front of the media and talking to all the fans and saying, we had a good scheme, we had a good game plan for this game. Had it been executed the way we wanted it to be executed, we would have won this game. But it didn't get executed the way we wanted it to be executed. Therefore, we lost this game. We just need to execute better moving forward. That is pointing the finger at the players and taking no accountability for yourself or the coaching staff. I said it constantly, and a lot of people were like, you're reading too much into the words. And no, I wasn't, because in 2024, you started hearing players say, kind of going, and they were starting to get frustrated with it. And then the Hail Mary happened, and Eberflus took no accountability for his role in the issues with the Hail Mary, and it took 3 press conferences till he finally said, I could have handled things better. And that was like a huge deal. Oh, look, Matt Eberflus finally taking some accountability. So when the coach doesn't take accountability up in front of the public, why should the players listen to him? When the players know the coaches aren't, flawless. The coaches aren't perfect. They're making mistakes, and the players know it, but they're pointing the finger at the players. That doesn't work well. Now you fast forward to Ben Johnson, and Ben Johnson, what did he do? Like I think it was Pat Finley brought up the Cairo Santos thing, whatever it was, like the later in the week when all the questions should have been about the Detroit Lions. I think it was Pat Finley still went back to Ben Johnson and the Vikings decision about Cairo Santos and trying to blast the ball through the end zone. And of course, Santos only gets it into the end zone and brings it out. And the Bears lose that last timeout, that 2-minute warning that they desperately needed if they were going to have any chance to get back in that game. So Ben Johnson basically says, can we get past this already? But what did he say? He said, I got greedy, because everybody said, why not just kick the ball out of bounds? You're giving the Vikings the ball at the 40 instead of the 35 if you blast it through the end zone. Because a long time ago, that when you kick the ball out of bounds, and I wouldn't be surprised if they change that rule coming up and give you the ball at like midfield moving forward. Because a long time ago, it was a hell of a punishment kicking the ball out of bounds, and the other team got the ball at the 40 because the touchback was the 20. Even the 25, it was okay. Then last year you get to the 30. Now we're at the 35 for these touchbacks. Kicking the ball out of bounds doesn't matter anymore. So just kick the ball out of bounds. Who cares about 5 yards? Ben Johnson sat there and says, I got greedy. I wanted the 5 yards. I made a mistake. Let's move past it. He said that, and he said it multiple times. Ben Johnson talked about how he hasn't gotten the tight ends involved enough, and that's on him. He needs to call a more balanced game. He's talked about how he didn't have certain preparations ready for Caleb Williams on how to respond to a certain defense. He's taking accountability at every press conference. So when he stands up there and says, these players do not have the practice habits of champions, the players are going to say, oh, screw Ben Johnson, because Ben Johnson is standing up there and taking accountability. That goes a long way into building that culture in the locker room. And that is important. If this is going to work moving forward, if Ben Johnson is truly going to change the culture at Hallis Hall, and it's not just in the locker room, we've talked about it, it is all the way through football operations on how this franchise operates on a day-to-day basis. Ben Johnson's going to change all that and make this a championship caliber franchise. Doesn't mean they're winning Super Bowls, but a championship caliber franchise. He's got to take accountability as well. That's how this works. So when we talk about Matt Eberflus and we talk about all the problems he had, and yes, do we need to get past Matt Eberflus? Yes, we do. And sometimes we'll still talk about Matt Nagy or Mark Trestman or even John Fox from time to time when there is a reason to, when there is a data point that happened under their watches that is important in terms of putting something in perspective as to what's happening in 2025, then we will obviously bring up those coaches. But I am using this Dallas Cowboys game to close the lid on Matt Eberflus and my constant piling on, because chef's kiss, it was a beautiful thing to watching Matt Eberflus's defense get completely dismantled by Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams, Luther Burden, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, and Cole Kmet and everyone else who scored a touchdown or threw for 300 yards or threw for 4 touchdowns or schemed up a beautiful game plan. All the things that happened in that game, it was a thing of beauty seeing Matt Eberflus have no answer for it. And I'm sure Matt Eberflus is a nice guy. I'm sure he's a good dad. Everyone says he's just a great guy to be around, and he's everybody's favorite uncle. And, that's great. I've never met Matt Eberflus. I don't know anything about Matt Eberflus. All I know is Matt Eberflus, the head coach, set this franchise back because he was a terrible head coach. And we used Mark Trestman as couldn't get worse than Mark Trestman, and Matt Eberflus found a way to make things worse than Mark Trestman. So, yeah, I'm going to pile on Matt Eberflus when I get the opportunity to, and I will use this game as the last time we need to do it. And moving forward, we will only talk about Matt Eberflus when there's a needed comparison, when there's a data point to be discussed. That's when we will talk about Matt Eberflus, because I loved it. Inject it into my veins. I loved seeing that man's defense get dismantled by this Bears offense. And I know he's missing talent, but here's the beautiful thing. And I will go to Rex Ryan, who was on, I believe it was Get Up, and he had a rant about the Dallas Cowboys defense coming off this Bears game. And he said, this isn't the doomsday defense. This is the Dumsday defense. And he didn't talk about the players. He was talking about scheme. He was talking about game planning. He was talking about defensive play calling, and he destroyed it. He never used Matt Eberflus's name, but he destroyed it. Sitting in zones, never trying man, never trying press coverage, just sitting in soft zones on third down and not trying to blitz and not trying to do things to create pass rush, and all the things that this podcast and radio shows and other podcasts and television shows and everybody complained about for 3 years with Matt Eberflus about this defense. And sure, it looked good at times. And sure, there were opportunities for it to really grow and become a great defense, but there was talent executing on certain things. And there were certain things that the defensive coordinator, i.e. the head coach, was holding them back on with those play calling. The amount of third down conversions, third and long conversions that the Bears saw consistently happening against them was astronomical and frustrating. And they just sat there and never bothered to do anything. And the only time, really, if we're being honest about this, the only time that this defense really looked fantastic was when Montez Sweat came over and looked like prime Reggie White for 9 games. When that happened, the entire defense elevated and looked a lot better. When Montez Sweat got back to Washington Commanders Montez Sweat and who he's been since, the defense doesn't look good. It doesn't look special. It can look average. It can look above average, but so many things held it back. And you could talk about a lot of talent on that defense, a lot of talent they paid for and that they drafted high up to make that defense for Matt Eberflus as strong as possible. And a lot of times it was his play calling that held it back. So seeing Matt Eberflus sitting in soft zones and seeing Caleb Williams rip him apart and seeing Caleb Williams have ample time to throw the football because Matt Eberflus did not do enough to try and dial up pressure, It was a thing of beauty. It was, I'll do it one more time, a chef's kiss performance, a beautiful thing from Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson. And I thoroughly enjoyed seeing Matt Eberflus get thrashed. That will end the Matt Eberflus thrashing on this podcast, just as we promised years ago when we said we would end the Mitch Trubisky thrashing, when we would end the Justin Fields thrashing. We have now ended the Matt Eberflus thrashing. And we move forward, with Caleb Williams, and we move forward with Ben Johnson. And I love that performance. I love seeing Caleb Williams perform at that level in what was basically a national game. I know it was a 425 game, but it was Tom Brady and Kevin Burkhardt. It was on for 80% of the, basically California and Arizona were the only states that didn't have that game. Everybody else had that game, and it had like 30 million viewers on Fox. Everybody watched that game and saw Caleb Williams perform like that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm excited. I will admit I probably fired the alarms a little too much. I'll take it. I'll tap the chest on that. I got a little too scared after that Vikings game because I saw too many bad habits that were still there that I thought weren't going to be there. But 2 games later, 3 games into the season, already seeing that stuff getting cleaned up already with Caleb Williams. Still some issues. He's still missing easy passes sometimes, hitting them in the dirt, things like that. So it's not perfect. And we know it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. But definitely seeing Caleb taking a massive strides in the right direction, getting comfortable. Ben Johnson's getting comfortable. It's really good to see. Now, I'm not going to overreact. I know some people want to sit there and crown everything and say the offense has arrived. This Dallas Cowboys defense is atrocious. Matt Eberflus is atrocious, and this talent on that defense is atrocious. It's a JV defense. It's a confidence-building performance from the Bears offense, but this is a JV defense. You got to do it against a varsity defense. Now, the Raiders, not better than the Cowboys, not quite varsity. You want to call this a great JV squad or a really bad varsity squad? So we need to see Caleb Williams do this again. We're at the point now where we need to see Caleb Williams stacking games. He's going to have bad games still. We know that. I mean, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, they have bad games still. It's fine. But we need to start seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 good games in a row. That's what we need to start seeing from Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson together. Great opportunity to do it against the Raiders defense that has Max Crosby and very little else. So while I am excited for what we saw from Caleb Williams, I am going to take a drink of water so I don't cough. I am still not jumping fully into the pool and saying Caleb Williams has arrived because I need to see it consistently. And I do need to see it it doesn't have to be against the number 1 defense in the league, but it has to be, it has to be against someone that isn't the 32nd defense in the league. And that's certainly what it looks like with the Dallas Cowboys. So thrilled with what Caleb did, thrilled with, Ben Johnson doing the flea flicker, doing some different things, getting the tight ends a little more involved. Colston Loveland maybe was poised to have a big game. Cole Kmet not still really getting involved in the offense, but the run game's frustrating because the blocking is getting much better in front of DeAndre Swift, and DeAndre Swift isn't really seeing it right now. And I think he's playing hard. I think he's running hard. He's blocking. He's doing the things Ben Johnson wants him to do. So he's getting rewarded with the rock, but he's not doing much with the rock at this point. We definitely need to see some improved play from DeAndre Swift. And the defense, it was better. And Tyreek Stevenson makes a play, causes a fumble. But is Tyreek Stevenson still someone I'm trusting to be sticky in coverage against an elite receiver? No, I'm not really seeing it there. Kyler Gordon really needs to get back. TJ Edwards needs to get back. Noah Sewell's looked okay against the run. He does not look great in pass coverage. So this defense needs to start getting a little healthier out there, so we can get a better idea of just exactly how bad this defense is. And it's not a good defense, but just exactly how bad is this defense? Because right now it looks bottom 5 in the league, and I feel it should be better than that, but average is about the ceiling here, especially with Jalen Johnson out. I think a lot of people expected this defense to be better than that this year. I did too, to be fair. I didn't know if it was going to be, this is a top 10 defense, but I did think it was going to be a top half defense in the league. And now I think just getting to be about average is about the ceiling. That Jalen Johnson injury really hurts, and they really desperately need to get Kyler Gordon back on the field. So let's, we kind of got through everything here. Let's end the monologue. We'll get to some questions in the mailbag after the interview with Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports. He joins me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Excited to do this. We do this every couple of years on this podcast. It seems, the Bears should be playing the Raiders once every 4 years, but somehow with the extra game and everything, the Bears seem to play the Raiders a lot more often than that. And this man comes on all the time. Well, it was Sirius XM, it was ESPN, now it's Yahoo. You can catch him on Yahoo Sports Daily. He is Jason Fitz, and he's a big Raiders fan. So when the Raiders and Bears get together, we always do this, and it's always a good conversation. Jason, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Nah, I'm great. You guys are taking over Vegas, too. I've heard that over 50% of the sales at Allegiant have been tracked to Chicago area. So Bears fans are going to do what Bears fans do incredibly well. They're going to travel and they're going to take over that stadium. So don't be surprised when it feels like a little mini home game on the West Coast. Have a nice party weekend in Vegas.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about that, because we always hear about the fact that the Chargers have no home field advantage in Los Angeles, and the Raiders certainly have a fan base. But the idea of the Raiders being in Vegas, and that seems, if a team is on the road, and I know the Bears travel well, it's Chicago, it's a big football town, but is that something the Raiders have been dealing with in Vegas? Is that opposing teams circle that as, let's make it a road trip, go to Vegas for the weekend, and they push some of those Raiders fans out and get a little bit less of a home field advantage for Vegas in those games?
1,000%. I mean, but we always knew that coming in. It's interesting because, I lived in Nashville forever, right? And the Titans get overtaken. In fact, Bears fans are the only fans I've ever heard of that actually drank Lower Broadway out of beer about a decade ago. I remember that distinctly. So look, it's the same thing. If you have a weekend and you're picking a road game to go to and you look around and say, well, do you want to go to New England? Foxborough's in the middle of nowhere. Does anybody really want to go to Minnesota? The answer is no. But if you can go to Vegas or you can go to Nashville for a weekend, you want to do it. And honestly, brother, when they first moved to Vegas, I put a deposit down to try and buy a season ticket. They went through their whole process and they called me, and the PSLs were very expensive. And the girl on the phone even said by that point, there were very few tickets left by the time they got to me on the season ticket list. It was going to be wildly expensive. And she said, look, you'll make your money back in the first year on these PSLs just selling your tickets. And I laughed and thought, no, there's no way. That's exactly what's happened. I mean, everybody saw the market better than I did. So there are a ton of Raiders fans that live all over the country, maybe not just in Vegas, that frankly are just selling their tickets until the team's actually any good. And, Mark Davis doesn't care because every game is sold out. Let's be clear. You can't buy these on the market. You have to buy them aftermarket. So Allegiant makes their money. Vegas makes their money. The Raiders make their money. It just means that until the team actually warrants it, there's not a big home field advantage.
All right, so I want to get into the Raiders with you, but let's start with the Bears because of that Caleb Williams performance against Dallas on Sunday. Now, of course, you host Yahoo Sports Daily. You can catch that on YouTube. You can catch that, wherever you get a lot of your, where you do a lot of your streaming. But YouTube's the easiest place to catch Yahoo Sports Daily. So, coming off of that Bears Cowboys game, what were you saying and the Yahoo gang saying about Caleb Williams' performance and this Bears offense after a couple bumpy weeks?
Look, I think it was a big moment, but I think we also have to acknowledge the fact that I'm not taking anything away from Russ, truly, or from Caleb, I should say, but we just watched Russ have a career high, and now he's been benched. The Cowboys defense is that stinking bad. And so I think the biggest thing that I've been preaching since the day that Ben Johnson was hired, because I think you got the home run hire of the hiring cycle in Chicago, right? Everybody knows that. It just takes a minute. And if you watch the quarterback series, which I did from last season, you saw Goff at one point. He kept. They had this moment where he said, "I want scuttlebutt. I want scuttlebutt." And after that play, he said to in the interview, "You really have to get to the point where you know the play that your play caller is going to call, and that play caller knows the play that you want called. You have to get to that common language." I think about that all the time because it's going to take time. I think it's a fair and reasonable assessment. As much as we all want Caleb Williams to go out and just dominate the league as a number one overall pick, I want the kid to be wildly successful. I just think the marriage between Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams will take time. I said when the season came out, when the schedule came out, as a Raiders fan, I was really happy we got Chicago in the first month. I'd much rather have Chicago in the first month than have Chicago in November, because I think this will click. I just think that what we saw last week has a lot to do with the fact that the Cowboys may have the worst defense in the NFL. They certainly have one of the most undisciplined defenses in the NFL, and they just don't have any playmakers that scare anybody, particularly in that game, at any level. So Caleb feasted. I think there are opportunities to feast against the Raiders also. I just am still going to keep preaching patience when it comes to his development.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And look, I ate some crow in my opening monologue here on this podcast, and admitted that I've settled down a little bit about Caleb, because I fired off a lot of alarm bells in week one, and not that I didn't think it was going to take a while for Ben and Caleb to mesh and for Caleb to really grasp this offense, but I saw things in week one that were really alarming to me. That wasn't just Caleb figuring out the offense. He felt frantic in the pocket. His accuracy was awful. He was missing receiver. There was just a lot going on where I kind of sat there and go, I just worry that maybe this isn't going to click for him for whatever reason, at least maybe in this offense, whatever it might be. So I may have pushed too many alarm buttons early. Again, I wasn't like saying, "Oh, this is it. It's over. He's gonna be terrible." But I was sitting there going, I just thought the functionality would look a little better, even with the mistakes. So I think we saw a little bit improvement in week two. It was kind of hard to judge because the game fell apart so much in the third quarter. And like you said, and I agree, the Dallas defense is not good. Bears fans certainly enjoy that was Matt Eberflus in charge of that defense, and seeing Bears receivers streaking open everywhere. But to me, and again, and I don't want to take anything away from Caleb and Ben Johnson, that's exactly what this team needed as a confidence builder, because if they can if they can beat the Raiders and get to 2-2, the schedule opens up a little bit where maybe they can get themselves back into this. I think this is a big game for the Bears coming up. But what I've seen is steady progress from Caleb Williams. You'll love to see the 4 touchdowns and all, but steady progress in terms of knowing where the ball needs to go, better reads at the line of scrimmage, hitting the hot routes when he needs to hit the hot routes, just better execution, where you love the stats, but you loved Mitch Trubisky's 6 touchdowns against the Bucs in 2018, whatever that was. So you kind of read past the stats, and that's where it's the best for me in terms of feeling where Caleb Williams is headed, is that the functionality in 3 weeks has really grown a lot.
Well, and so there are 2 things about this. One, I don't think you were wrong to overreact or let's say react harshly in week one, because tendencies that we saw in college that continue in the NFL concern me. So like when Sam Darnold throws a bunch of interceptions, it concerns me, because that happens sometimes. Like Zach Wilson's a great example of a quarterback that never really developed for the Jets. It wasn't that Zach Wilson didn't develop for the Jets. It's that everything Zach Wilson did wrong for the Jets was also what he did wrong at the college football level. So I became concerned. I think there is a fair concern of, the coaching in Chicago didn't get rid of some of those bad habits that came with him from USC. And that's fair. I had one scout when we were prepping for the NFL draft say to me, it's not about the incredible plays. The question isn't even, with what he's capable of doing. The question is, why did he make the incredible play when the easy play was there to be had? And that's a very fair thing. If you go back and watch some of the film in college, it's not, okay, he ran around and made this incredible play. It's, man, this guy was right here and you didn't take the easy thing right in front of you. And how many times have we heard already in his pro career, just take the easy thing. It's right there. Just take the moment that you can have in front of you. So I think the problem sometimes is that Josh Allen has created has changed the way everybody wants to analyze the position. Josh Allen is the outlier. Like, I was at ESPN and I sat in the room with great football minds, people that played in the league and were very successful Super Bowl winners, that sat there and said, his technique is so bad. So much of this is so bad. He's never going to be an NFL quarterback. Everybody was wrong, because he is the one outlier. But as I tell you all the time, I tell everybody, like, if you go to the convenience store and you buy a scratch-off lottery ticket and you win enough money to pay your mortgage this month, that's awesome. You don't do that every month hoping that's your new plan on how to pay your mortgage. Josh Allen is a scratch-off lottery ticket. The changes he made to everything he did wrong is the exception, not the rule. So when I see stacked on mistakes, it does concern me. And I thought in week one, it was a very fair concern to look at it and say, man, when Caleb panics, he goes back to the Caleb he knows, because that's what he's done for so long. So how does it look? I mean, this is a very favorable matchup for you guys, particularly because the Raiders defense has one playmaker and that's it. So there's a lot of opportunity in this. I think Caleb just needs to keep stacking little wins along the way. And then by the end of it, all of a sudden, he's a much different version of Caleb Williams.
Let me ask you about Ben Johnson, because you talked about the Bears were the big winner in the offseason with coaches with Ben Johnson. I want to talk about Pete Carroll here with you in a minute. But the Ben Johnson thing I think was interesting because the one question that everyone had in January was the old, is he a leader of men? Some people are like, oh, this is just a guy who wants to sit in a whiteboard in his office and draw plays. He doesn't want to lead a locker room. And I think that's been the most pleasant surprise is, I mean, he's kind of borderline psychotic in terms of his attention to detail and is setting the bar and his expectations of the players. And I think that's been really nice to see as, after Nagy and Eberflus were definitely more laid back and kind of tried to let the locker room police themselves. It didn't work really well. Mark Trestman was a disaster as a leader. So when we see someone like this in Chicago with Ben Johnson, I think it's been a real pleasant surprise because I think there was some questions and there were some Bears media types enough to say, oh, they should go for Mike Vrabel. Some people were saying they should go for Pete Carroll, that established, that culture setter. Ben Johnson doesn't know how to do that. Now, obviously, he learned a lot from Dan Campbell, but I think that's been nice. So, like from the national point of view, what have you seen here over the last few months with Ben Johnson in terms of being a leader and being able to coach? Because, like, the one thing I love is he sits in those press conferences and he'll criticize players, he'll criticize the locker room, but he'll also take accountability for his own mistakes. And I think that's been a real pleasant surprise because Matt Eberflus would just stand up there and just say, we need to execute better, which is basically just pointing the finger at the players.
Well, I think at some point it's fair. The job of a head coach, as you well know, is so different than the job of an offensive coordinator. I would argue that they're not related at all. Like they're two very different skill sets. So to me, it's a little bit like saying, hey, this guy ran a marathon, so now I'm going to let him drive a semi. Like they're just not related. And so it's fair to look at it and say, how's it going to look? I think the important thing for new head coaches particularly is that they come in with some level of confidence, authenticity in who they are, how they're going to run things, transparency with locker rooms, transparency with people around them. I think there's a real appeal to somebody that comes in and just knows exactly who they are and exactly how they want to do it. Now, you have to get results. I will remind everybody that Dan Campbell was just, reviled in that opening. We're going to, break kneecaps. Everybody made fun of that. It's like, oh, this is the worst hire ever. And Mike McDaniel was certainly loved. Everyone's like, oh, he's quirky. He's interesting. He's weird. Where are those two coaches now, right? Like very different perceptions of them. So I think you have to go through it to kind of understand how you go through it, if that makes sense. But what's been impressive to me so far is that Ben has been very consistent. Like, I think you'd agree that his messaging from day one has been consistent. Yep. His tone since day one, when he sits up in front of a mic, he answers things concisely. He obviously has complete control of what he's trying to communicate. These are the things that I think really matter. When I talk to guys that played that have been in these locker rooms, they talk about it all the time. Like, you need somebody that knows how to relate to everybody, and also somebody that understands when you need structure and when you don't need structure. And you need somebody that can vibe with 53 very different people in 53 different ways with 53 backgrounds, right? Like, that's all so much. And in order to do that, I think you got to be really comfortable in your own skin. And the one thing that I would say is, from the outset of training camp, particularly, that's where all eyes really came in. It's like, now this is your team, your organization. From the outset of training camp, Ben Johnson has felt like he's been a head coach forever. And that to me is really impressive. There just hasn't been that moment that we have for so many coaches where we say, oh, well, he's figuring it out. He's learning it. And not for nothing. I mean, I think there's Mike Vrabel, somebody I covered in Tennessee. I think Vrabel's a great coach, but I think sometimes you got to look outside of all of it and say, hey, we want to try and do something that will maximize the great player that we have. And if you wanted to maximize Caleb, it was never going to be through Mike Vrabel. I don't think it was ever going to be through Pete Carroll. Like, I think the reason this is a home run is because you knew you have the tools. Like, if you open the basket of ingredients from Chopped, you knew you had filet in there. Like, Caleb Williams is that. So you got to get somebody that can come in the room and maximize him while also managing the rest of the roster. I think Ben's doing a brilliant job of that so far. Again, acquiescing that I didn't expect the Bears to come in and be a playoff team this year. I thought the Bears were going to be a team this year that came in and won 7 or 8 games and just looks like, man, we have righted the ship. We are going the right direction. Next year, we are ready to take a meteoric leap. I still think that's a pretty fair assessment. And so far early in the season, I haven't seen anything that makes me wonder if they got this right.
All right, let me ask you about, let's go back to the offseason, because I want to ask you about the Raiders and the Bears with the pursuit of Ben Johnson, because I looked like a fool on social media because, talking to people behind the scenes, and I'm sure you did as well, the NFL media, the circles, the Ben Johnson to the Raiders smoke was just a giant billowing, a forest fire at that point. It seemed like everyone thought this was going to happen. No one really knows exactly where it started. I had Ben Johnson's agent, Rick Smith, on this podcast, and he basically said, he goes, I don't know where it came from, but he goes, I liked that. So I just let it burn, basically. Where were you with the Raiders with this coaching hire? Were you hopeful for Ben Johnson? Is that the guy you wanted for this organization? And what do you think about the job Pete Carroll's doing so far?
100% I wanted Ben. There's no doubt about it. Now, I will admit, I wanted Ben with fully acknowledging that I had no idea why he would take the job, because the Raiders never had a clear path to a quarterback.
Right.
And that's, I think, the biggest thing. If you're taking a job, Herm Edwards told me when I was still in music, I was sitting backstage at the Grand Ole Opry at an event, first time I ever met Herm, and we were just talking football. And he said, let me tell you, brother, if you have a quarterback, you are a great coach. And if you don't, you aren't. And I think about that every time a job comes open, because, the Raiders had no answer at the quarterback position. So the concept of Ben Johnson surprised me. But to your point, I talked to people. I talked to local reporters. I talked to national reporters that covered just that team. I talked to people that I think are well plugged in the organization. There were so many people that kept saying, I don't know how this has happened, but I think this is real. I think Ben's going to come here. It's got to be Brady. I don't know. So I can't find, it's like a game of telephone. Nobody can figure out where it came from, but everybody was like, it's so, where there's smoke, there must be fire. They really thought, people in the inner circles of the Raiders really thought it was going to happen, and it didn't. And I look at that and say, okay, I think Ben Johnson made the right decision for a million reasons. Again, young quarterback. B, he stays in a division he knows really well, which I think is a huge advantage. Remember, when Peyton Manning left the Colts, he said one of the things he wanted to do was stay in the AFC because he had a book on every team in the AFC. He knew that conference well. I think it makes a lot of sense for Ben to stay somewhere where it's like, hey, I know these coaches. I know what it takes to win against these teams. I know what I'm up against, and I know how the best team in my division is going to do things for the foreseeable future. Like, I think these all, when you stack the bricks of logic, your Lego castle, it makes 100% sense to me. I was stunned by the Pete Carroll hire for the Raiders. I think, stunned in a good and bad way. I have said this so many times, but I'll echo it again without being political at all, because you know me, I don't have a political bone in my body. If you think that Pete Carroll is too old to run a football team, I would just remind you that the last two people that we voted to run the United States of America were both older than Pete Carroll. So if you can run the free world, you could probably run a football team. Now, what's that mean for their long-term answers? I don't think they know. But I think what happened in Vegas is that things just got so bad that they looked around and said, we've got to bring an adult in the room that can teach us how to be competent as an organization. Because Mark Davis has never been shy on spending money. He's never been shy on hiring big names. Like, he thought he was hitting a home run when he brought Gruden back. He thought he was hitting a home run, spending a lot of money bringing in Josh McDaniels. Like, he hires big names. He just doesn't know how to build a culture at the NFL level. He does with the WNBA. I have no idea why, but his process works there. Like, he hired the best coach in the world. He pays his players an astronomical amount in the WNBA. He wins championships. It just doesn't work that simply in the NFL. So I think what they really wanted to do, and I mean they as in also Brady, they wanted Spytek, the new GM, John Spytek, to come in and have the chance to really become the face of the organization for the next 20 years. So they bring in Pete Carroll, somebody tremendously experienced, and basically Spytek learns from Pete while they sort of figure out how to bridge the gap to what their future looks like. I think that's probably the reasonable expectation, but I don't think the Raiders really know what they're doing in 3 or 4 years. I just think they know they're tired of being terrible right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear, my cat has snuck into the room here, but
your cat agrees with me. All right.
Yes,
your cat sounds like me every Sunday. And
he's a very vocal Pete Carroll supporter. So let me ask you this, because one thing we talk about all the time when we do this podcast about the Raiders and the Bears and the similarities is the problem with ownership and the problems in the building, the very, when you go all the way up to the top in terms of how you establish the right culture, the winning culture, how to make sure everyone in the building is doing things the right way. And I think the McCaskies and Davis had very similar problems with that. And they've each gone to two different people, but with the same problem in hand. Bring in Ben Johnson to fix the culture, and not just fix the culture with the locker room, but in football operations and everywhere. Kevin Warren is the president, a little bit in the same way, about making sure the Bears are run in a proper organization. And the Bucks, just saw an article in The Athletic that the Tampa Bay organization, one of the best run organizations in football, according to other front offices. So they bring in, Spytek, someone like that, someone that has familiarity with Brady, obviously a winner, knows how an organization should operate. And of course, Pete Carroll is the ultimate culture guy and what he built in Seattle. So I think it's interesting. It's two different approaches, but you can see both organizations trying to correct the main problem that seems to have been rotting these teams for the last 20, 25 years, and why they just can't get any consistent success is the organizations just don't know how to operate. And perhaps Carroll and Johnson and the guys in place here can finally start changing this for both organizations.
Well, what's interesting is there's no right answer on how to fix it. Like if you read the report card, the NFL Players Association report card on how organizations are viewed, players love playing for the Raiders. They're consistently one of the highest scoring at everything. They take care of families. They do all of the dietitian things. Like it's world class. I've been to that Raiders facility, the headquarters, more times than I can count. And it is alarmingly awesome. Like it is just badass. Everything that they've done is first class. So you can build a first class organization, but you still got to hire the right people. And what do you do when your owner just isn't great at identifying the right person? And I think, for the Raiders, that's why they brought in Brady. If you really think about it, Brady is essentially acting as a team president and a GM without any recourse where he can ever get fired because he was sold a minority ownership stake, right? So it's their way of saying, hey, we want you to be a GM. I don't want to be a GM. We want you to be a team president. I don't want to be a team president. Well, we'll sell you a share at a very discounted rate. Now that I'm into, right? So Brady can come in and sort of try and establish his culture, but also Elway sucked at it with the Broncos. Like Michael Jordan sucked as a team owner. So I don't think until you get it right. And like, I don't want to oversimplify here, but you know my love of 80s pro wrestling, right? I think sometimes it's about being a great tag team. Like you've got to find the right combo of coach and quarterback. And sometimes it's just getting lucky. Remember, a couple of years ago, we literally said on national TV, there is no way that any coaching candidate, especially any minority coaching candidate, would ever want the Texans job, ever. And that franchise might be the worst run in the history of the NFL. Well, it turns out D'Amico really wanted to be the coach there because he loves that city and loves that team. And then not only did they hire D'Amico, but they have this home run of a draft where they get a defensive superstar and their quarterback of the future, right? And now all of a sudden, every year the Texans have some level of playoff expectations. We forget how bad the Texans actually were because they got the right tandem of coach and quarterback. And I just think that's unfortunately the special sauce. Like you've got to have that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. It works. You've got Harbaugh with Herbert. It works. I don't think it's either or. I think you have to have both, especially in the modern AFC. Like I think part of the reason that Joe Burrow is just sort of stuck is I don't think he's got that coach. I don't think he's got that organization. I don't think he's got that support. But certainly Baltimore does with Harbaugh and Lamar, right? So like look at the greats in the league right now. And it really is about finding a home run hire at the coaching position and a home run draft pick at the quarterback position. If you can't do those two things, I don't think you can establish a winning culture anymore. So I really, it's just, you're just consistently, you're throwing spaghetti against the wall every single year to hope that you get the right combo. And it's just, it scares me to death because there isn't an easy or right answer. And what do you do if the organization you love is just bad at finding that one person that can establish the culture?
Yeah, and obviously that's been something that's plagued both these franchises for a while. I want to ask you about two players on the Raiders, quarterback and the running back. So let's start with the quarterback since you were talking about trying to find that coach-quarterback combination. And Geno Smith's been a great story in Seattle the last few years. Obviously, you talked about the Raiders didn't really have a clear path to a quarterback, so Pete Carroll goes out and gets his guy Geno Smith. Now, so far this season, really good in week 1. Pretty awful in week 2. Week 3, the stats look okay, but a lot of that was padded in the end of the game there when it was well out of reach. What did you think of the Geno Smith move when it was made? And are you confident this guy can, be a functional quarterback? I know he's not going to be a top 5, top 10 quarterback, but can he be good enough for the Raiders to have success?
Yeah. So here's what I would argue, and this will tie into both of the guys we're about to talk about. I think if you protect Geno, he can be a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. He can be that guy. And certainly week 1, he looked like it. When he got enough protection to actually stand upright, man, some of those throws, his accuracy is absolutely through the roof, and they got guys that can catch those. So there are certainly weapons out there. The problem is He's not getting any time. So what happened in week 3, particularly against Washington, is they were just getting bombarded, and the offensive line might be the worst I've seen from the Raiders in the last 20 years. So as he starts getting bombarded constantly and hit from everywhere, and the offensive line can't pick anything up, then as he drops back, you'll start to see him fold a little bit into the offensive line. Like he's feeling pressure because he thinks it's coming, and he doesn't have time to get the ball down the field. And so much of what they're trying to do is exactly that. So it's interesting because I would have expected before last week, I would expect this week that there's a real adjustment. Get the ball out of his hands quicker, shorten some of these routes, try and find things that are 3 to 5 yards down the field and just sort of chunk your way down there. Because the reality of it is this offensive line isn't bad. This offensive line is terrible. And I genuinely mean that. There was a weird controversy in training camp about the starting center from last year, Jackson Powers-Johnson, being moved to guard, and he's been fighting for a spot. It feels like this coaching staff doesn't really like him. He's fighting to be a guard, and the guy they have in at center is playing terribly. There's a couple of plays that have been out there. Look at when you're watching the Raiders, look at their left guard, Dylan Parham, who's been so confused in multiple weeks that there is plenty of footage out there on Twitter of him just standing there while pass rushers just run by him. It is alarming. I have never seen an offensive line communicate this poorly and play this poorly at least in the last 20 years of my Raiders fandom. So I think if Geno can be upright, yeah, he can deliver the ball to almost anybody. And there are pass catchers that can do some damage. I just fear that they won't be able to keep him upright, which is the problem with Ashton Jeanty. I know that's where we're going next. Like Ashton Jeanty, if you look at the numbers on yards before contact,
it's in the negatives, isn't it?
Right. It's negative. He's literally in the negative. And the funny thing is 3 or 4 times a game, he'll pop off a 13-yard run. And then the other 14 or 15 carries are negative yardage every time. So what does that do? You're trying to hand the ball off on first down. Well, the number of times the Raiders have been in 2nd and 9 already this season is disgusting. So then they're teeing off at this terrible offensive line on 2nd and 9. And now all of a sudden you got a sack and it's 3rd and 14, right? So that's the offense is broken because the offensive line is terrible. Ashton Jeanty has had some really amazing moments, and he's just there. You can see the flashes of it. The concern is, can he even stay upright? So if the Bears defensive line comes with a level of fire and energy that they should, if the Bears are able to also send some interesting stunts, it is really easy. Like this isn't a go in and beat them one-on-one. This is a confuse this offensive line, and they will just stand there and watch you run by them.
Well, and Dennis Allen usually does a pretty good job of throwing some confusing stuff at offenses. So we'll see if that pans out. But I do want to ask you about Jeanty, and you kind of talked about the struggles, which have been pretty well documented over these last couple of weeks about he's getting hit in the backfield and just not getting a lot of opportunities to actually get going and get running downhill. But that brings me to the question of the strategy of drafting Ashton Jeanty in the first place, because Bears fans were desperate for Ashton Jeanty to find his way into a Chicago Bears uniform. And DeAndre Swift, for the Bears fans that wanted Jeanty, to be fair, Swift has been awful. If you look at the Bears, their run blocking and a lot of the things, they're all very positive, but DeAndre Swift's success rates and everything is much worse than it should be. So the kind of almost two opposite situations where Jeanty's making the most out of a little and Swift's making a little out of the most. So when you look at that, the Bears really wanted Jeanty, but they had gone out there and gotten 3 new interior offensive linemen via trades and in free agency. They had the tackles with Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, or so they thought. Braxton Jones been a little iffy, but overall they were comfortable with their offensive line going in there. So had they made the move for a running back, I think you could argue it a little more, but you talked about that Raiders offensive line really being good. And I don't think a lot of people thought the Raiders offensive line was good and it's underperforming. I think a lot of people kind of expected that to struggle this year. So where were you, and we always talk about when is the right time to kind of invest in a running back. We know what kind of offense Pete Carroll wants to run, but taking Jeanty before you have the offensive line set seemed like it might've been a questionable decision, and it hasn't worked out so far for the Raiders.
So it was. And look, anytime, I would say this to every single fan base, anytime your team drafts a fat guy, I don't care, offensive or defensive line, if you draft a fat guy, throw a little confetti parade, because there just aren't enough quality offensive or defensive linemen in the NFL right now. And what have we seen over and over and over again? Like, we just watched the Lions absolutely destroy a good football team because their defensive line was so good, right? Like, so get at me with line play is everything. Line play is life. Here's where I think the Raiders were. They're going into that. Number one, I believe that they felt like they could get some guys to develop later in the draft. They drafted 2 offensive linemen in the 3rd round that they intend to develop long-term. But then the other part of it is, by the time they got to the draft, I think you knew the offensive line was going to suck, right? So if you know the offensive line is going to suck and no one player is going to fix that, like you can't fix the entire interior of an offensive line and your right tackle. They've got one guy, they needed four. So at what point, when you are just a team devoid of talent all over the place, at what point do you say, you know what, the right approach here is best player available? If we believe that this best player is truly transcendent, then we can take a year and get the right offensive line. We can worry about getting the right offensive lineman next offseason. We could try and develop some guys. We could try and hang on for dear life. But I don't think any of the young offensive linemen we were talking about, as good as some of them were perceived to be, we're going to come in and be a line saver. So even if you draft a right tackle, and so you have Colt Miller on one side and you have one of the a good right tackle on the other side, if the entire interior of your offensive line is screwed, you can't do anything. I do think that there was some element of this of like, hey, maybe Ashton can save us in some situations. Maybe the best friend to a bad offensive line can be a running back. They can do something great. It's just this offensive line is even worse than anybody could have imagined. So I think it's a little bit, I think there was some logic behind it. I also think that hindsight 2020, I mean, what do I always wish? I wish my favorite team had a great, if your favorite team has a killer offensive line, if you have an offensive line as good as the Eagles or as good as the Lions, man, you can suddenly, what would Jared Goff look like behind a trash offensive line? We have no idea. We have no idea, right? So, like, I just think that there's some element of, you're right. That's the right thing to do. I just don't know if you can always take the time to do it slow and low when sometimes you just need a player. And I will die on the hill of when you've got Brock Bowers and Max Crosby and nobody else on your team that scares literally anybody. Sometimes you just got to keep it simple. If you got a chance at a generational talent, you take the generational talent and then you trust yourself to be able to build around him for the next few years.
And I think that is fair. I mean, in terms of the true blue chip prospects, there was, Travis Hunter, maybe Cam Ward, and Abdul Carter, Ashton Jeanty. There weren't a lot in this draft. I mean, obviously there's going to be guys that develop into blue chippers, but in terms of those guys at the top of boards.
If Abdul Carter had fallen to the Raiders, I think they would have run up for that because that's the way to beat Mahomes. Max Crosby and Abdul Carter together.
Sure.
Would have been a delight, but people in hell want ice water too. Like it was never going to happen. He was never going to get that far down.
All right, last question for you. Let me just ask you about the game. You talked about some of the things the Bears might be able to exploit with the Raiders defense. Bears defense has issues as well with Jalen Johnson out for the year. Kyler Gordon still a DNP in Wednesday's practice. The Bears are hopeful maybe he could play this weekend, but we'll see. TJ Edwards still not practicing. So the Bears defense is certainly banged up. It's certainly a defense that can be exploited. Maybe this ends up being a high-scoring game, but kind of how do you see this game playing out on Sunday?
Well, Brock Bowers hasn't been the same since week one when he got he hurt his knee in week one, and so it's not the usual Brock Bowers. So, I think if you're a Bears fan, you breathe a little sigh of relief. But Jacoby Myers has been a true number one for the Raiders so far this year. So there are opportunities. If they can protect Geno, I think they can move the football. But you're right. Conversely, the Raiders have Max Crosby and nothing else. They're not generating anything from anybody else. I saw a couple of plays against Washington. As much as people keep talking about Max's pass rush win rate being down this year, saw a couple of plays where he was literally triple teamed and they had a running back there to chip him. Like, that's how much work they're putting into stopping Max right now. It's exactly what I expect Ben Johnson to do. So I think you're going to minimize the impact of Max and you're going to be able to put points up. The secondary of the Raiders is suspect to be kind. They're growing. They're developing. So I think there's going to be a lot of yards in this game. This is sort of a hammer the over game for me. I don't trust the Raiders. If I trusted the Raiders offensive line even a little bit, I think the Raiders win this football game being in Vegas. I don't trust it. So I think the Bears get a weirdly ugly, like this is one of those weirdly ugly blown coverages, busted defenses all over the place. And we're all standing around saying, how the hell did you not tackle that guy? And it ends up being a weird high scoring game. But I think Chicago probably ekes it out.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so there he is, Jason Fitz. You can Yahoo Sports Daily. He's hosting there. You can catch that on YouTube, of course, at Jason Fitz on Twitter/X, whatever you're calling it these days. Jay, thanks for so much time. Great conversation, and I'll wish you luck starting next Sunday.
Same to you. I hope you win every game after Sunday. There you go, brother. Appreciate you.
All right, take care. There he is, Jason Fitz. I thought that was a great conversation. I thought Jay did a great job really explaining where things are with the Raiders, where their problems are. And hey, he's picking the Bears this week in Vegas to topple the Raiders. Love to hear that. I will get to my prediction here in just a couple of minutes. But Before we get to the mailbag, I would love to talk to you about merchandise. As you know, as Yogurt said in Spaceballs, merchandising. Spaceballs the t-shirt, Spaceballs the underworld, Spaceballs the flamethrower. Well, now you can get Second City Gridiron merchandise. Make sure you check it out. If you Google, the easiest way to do this, if you Google search Second City Gridiron merchandise, it's the top hit. It's through a website called Fourth Wall. You can get merch from any of the podcasts on here, whether that be Bear and Balance, Bears Over Beers. There's some great stuff on there for, Mac and Reed and Making Monsters. We've got all the shows covered. So make sure you check out the merchandise there. And yes, there is merchandise from Bears Banter. There is a mug. There is a t-shirt. There is a winter hat. There are plenty of options. And of course, there's Second City Gridiron merchandise as well if you want the podcast channel logo. So make sure you check it out at the Fourth Wall. Make sure you buy some of that merch. It will look great. I promise. The stuff looks fantastic. Make sure you check it out. Just Google Second City Gridiron merchandise, and it is the top hit in Google. Check out everything we have to offer there, and would love to see some Bears Banter merchandise out on some Bears fans' heads and shirts, and in the mugs for the coffee. Make sure you hit it all up because it looks fantastic. Now, let's get to the mailbag. Let's get to some questions here. We'll wrap it up with a prediction. Let's start with Billy Kidd. Now that it seems the offense is getting better and will keep the Bears in games for possible wins, will the defense blow it for them for possible losses? Billy, that certainly looks like a possibility. Bears, they're doing an okay job against the run, but they're not generating a pass rush, and their secondary isn't being sticky enough overall. Yes, they're making some plays here or there and causing some turnovers, and that's important, and that's great, but it's not happening consistently enough with the amount of yardage and big plays they're giving up. Obviously, Detroit had a field day with them. Dallas, had plenty of opportunities despite CeeDee Lamb going out early. They had opportunities. Luckily, Dallas shot themselves in the foot, and the Bears did make a couple of plays, but there wasn't a lot there that made you sit there and say, oh, this Bears defense has turned the corner. They're looking much better. Yes, there are some players playing well in isolation. Gervon Dexter has been really good in 2 of the 3 games. Montez Sweat is making an impact here or there. Odangbo had a decent game. Noah Sewell's looked okay in the run, not so much in coverage. Tremaine Edmonds has looked better, not worth $18 million better, but still has looked better. But until TJ Edwards is back out there and playing, until Kyler Gordon is back out there and playing, there are going to be holes on this defense to exploit. There's still going to be holes on this defense to exploit when those guys are back, but there's going to be less of them, and that will certainly help. But right now, Billy, and I mentioned it at the top of the show, this is an average defense at best. I think more likely, I don't think this defense is terrible where it's going to be the worst in the league. Dennis Allen's too good for that. But could this defense be around 20? I think that's definitely a possibility. So yes, they will be blowing more games on the defense than they will be winning games because of the defense. That's for sure. Charlie Blanchard asks, do you think there's a running back from outside the organization added at some point this season? Charlie, I've been pretty consistent with it. I don't see it. The Bears have holes. They don't have all the personnel they want. It's going to take Ben Johnson 3 years to get this roster into his full vision, and they just couldn't do it at the running back. So do you want to give up a draft pick for a mediocre running back? I mean, if there's a guy that Ben Johnson really thinks can help, sure, maybe they'll do it. I just don't see it as you want to go out there and get Breece Hall. You think that's going to magically change things? I don't. I think they just don't have a lot of talent in this running back room right now, and it's just going to be what it is for this season. DeAndre Swift should be an RB2. He should not be an RB1. Kyle Monangai and Roshan Johnson should be RB3s. They shouldn't be RB2s. So they don't have an RB1. They're making do with what they have, and they just aren't going to go get an RB1. Like some of these bad teams, like Alvin Kamara, if he becomes available before the trade deadline, yes, he might be good still. Yes, he might be able to help the Bears for a year. or for the rest of this season, maybe next season, but the man's 30 years old. That cliff is right around the corner. We don't know when he's going to hit it. Some people thought he's already hit it a little bit. So that's not something I think the Bears should do, is go out and give out more draft capital for a running back that may or may not help them. JT Barzak, how confident are you in Ben Johnson individually as the long-term head coach, Caleb Williams as eventually being a top 5 to 10 in the league franchise QB, and the Ben Johnson-Caleb Williams pairing all on scales of 1 to 10? Well, JT, let's jump into it. Confidence in Ben Johnson. This is the most confident I have been in a head coach probably ever. You know, where maybe with Lovie Smith, where I sat there and said, Lovie's the right guy. They're winning games with him. But did I ever think, oh, Lovie Smith's going to be one of the top 5 coaches in the league? No, I never did. So with Ben Johnson, I have more confidence that Ben Johnson will eventually be an elite head coach. He's not there yet. He's still making mistakes. He's figuring things out. That he will eventually be an elite head coach within the first couple seasons of him on the job than I have with anyone else. And I'm pretty confident on this podcast. After the 2018 season, I sat here incorrectly saying that Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were going to be here for the next 8 to 10 years, that the Bears finally had their head coach and general manager pairing, and that they were going to make it work. And obviously, I was wrong. So I'm not going to sit here and say, because I said Ben Johnson, I'm the most confidence in him as becoming a great head coach for the Bears. Doesn't mean I'm going to be right. But Matt Nagy didn't handle press conferences like Ben Johnson did. Matt Nagy, I mean, he had Club Dub. The players loved him, but it's really easy to love a guy when he comes in and you go 12-4. We saw that culture wither away over the years, and it was gone by 2021 when obviously Nagy eventually got fired. So it's really easy to have a great culture when you're winning games. Not as much when you're losing games. And that's what Ben Johnson's trying to do right now. He's stripping that culture down to the studs and building it back up from the ground. And I am confident that Ben Johnson is going to get this done and get this done right. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a couple of years, but I do think he's right. So I will put confidence in Ben Johnson at a 9. For Caleb Williams eventually being a top 5 to 10 league franchise QB. In terms of being top 10, there's a huge difference for me between top 5 and top 10. Top 10 is good enough to win a Super Bowl. Top 5 is will win a Super Bowl because of the quarterback. I think there's a big difference there. Jared Goff is now a top 10 QB in the league. I will never sit there and say the Detroit Lions are winning a Super Bowl because they have Jared Goff at quarterback. I can say the Detroit Lions could win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff at quarterback. The differences in that sentence are significant for me. Quarterbacks that you sit there and say they will, and again, maybe they haven't and maybe they won't. Dan Marino didn't win a Super Bowl, but Dan Marino was in the category of, you know, the Dolphins will win a Super Bowl because they have Dan Marino at quarterback. It just never happened. Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. Those 4 are elite top 5 quarterbacks. I know it sounds funny to say. I don't know if there's a 5th top 5 quarterback right now. There's certainly not a consensus one. I would make Justin Herbert my 5th quarterback. Some people would want to put Jaden Daniels in there. Some people would want to put Jalen Hurts in there. I think maybe people would argue Goff. They would still argue Stafford. There are plenty of guys that are up for debate for that 5th spot in terms of being a top 5 quarterback in the league. So when you say top 5, I'm going to split this up into top 5 and top 10. Confidence that Caleb Williams is going to be a top 10 quarterback in the league, because when I say top half in the league, for me, that's a 10 for Caleb Williams. With Ben Johnson, what I'm seeing already, basically for me, that pivot point is Kyler Murray. I've talked about it on this podcast before. Jay Cutler was the quarterback of, if you had a quarterback worse than Jay Cutler, you needed a new one. If you had a quarterback better than Jay Cutler, you were in good shape. For me, that guy now is Kyler Murray. If you have a quarterback worse than Kyler Murray, keep looking. If your quarterback is better than Kyler Murray, you're okay. And to me, Caleb Williams will be in the right side of that argument, possibly by the end of this season. So my confidence is a 10 that Caleb Williams will be a top half quarterback in the league. That's not what you asked. You asked for top 10. Now, top 10, I am still pretty damn confident that Caleb Williams is going to work his way into that conversation. I'm going to put that at about a 7 or an 8 right now. But in terms of top 5, I'm going to drop that to a 5, which, may sound low. That's not low. That's a big accomplishment. That's something that if you're a consistent top 5 quarterback in the league, you're a Hall of Famer. And I'm saying basically at a 5, I'm saying, right in the middle there, that he could reach that level with Ben Johnson. And with your final aspect of this question about the Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams pairing, well, I wrote about that at Windy City Gridiron right at the start of the season. This is the type of pairing that you can talk about possibly eventually getting into that elite pairing. Because when you talk about the great head coaches of all time, and I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but when you talk about the great head coaches of all time, most of them have an all-time great quarterback. We can go through it. Go all the way back to George Halas. He had Sid Luckman. Don Shula had Bob Greasy, Dan Marino, and he even was head coach of the Colts with Johnny Unitas. Just keep going through it. Tom Landry had Roger Staubach. Vince Lombardi had Bart Starr. Chuck Noll had Terry Bradshaw. Bill Belichick had Tom Brady. Jimmy Johnson had Troy Aikman. It is Bill Walsh, Joe Montana. It is very frequent that happens. There are exceptions. I'm not saying there aren't. There are exceptions. Andy Reid now has Patrick Mahomes. Donovan McNabb wasn't at that level. Reid didn't reach this level until he had the all-time great quarterback. To me, Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams have a chance to become that. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win Super Bowls. Dan Marino and Don Shula never won together. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. But it should and it could if they both reach that potential together. So confidence that Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams are the right pairing, I will put that at about an 8. I like what I'm seeing so far, JT. I think they are in pretty damn good shape. Now, I have one more. Someone sent it to my direct messages. Let me see if my old ass can dig it up because my computer is freezing. It's absolutely a perfect time to have that fail. There it finally loads. And let's scroll down. I love how many sex bots and crypto bots end up in my direct messages. It really, really works out great. Thanks so much, Elon. All right, Ron Reich, here it is, had this question. Hi, Bill, big fan of the podcast. Please answer my question for your upcoming mailbag. You run the Bears and have a time machine. You go back to January 2024, and knowing what you know now, what would you do? Options may include still draft Caleb, but fire Flus, bring in Ben Johnson or Jim Harbaugh, trade down a spot or 2 in the draft and get Jaden or Drake May, trade down to get J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix with a super haul. Just some examples. Thanks. All right, well, I need to cough here, so hang on one second, Ron. All right, let's jump into this question. I've got a time machine. First of all, there are things I should probably do with my time machine other than try and fix the Bears, but we're going to focus on the question at hand, and let's look at this. All right, so January of 2024, everybody with half a brain knew that Matt Eberflus needed to be fired. So 100%, I am firing Matt Eberflus. I don't need to hesitate. I don't need to consider my other options. He is gone. I am 100% pursuing Ben Johnson. Now, we have heard from plenty of people, oh, Ben Johnson wouldn't have taken the job. I'm going to say BS. I think Ben Johnson is trying to do the let's pour cold water on this so the fans don't turn this into we could have had Ben Johnson a year earlier, and it just is more vitriol towards Matt Eberflus and everything else. I think he has kind of leaked that. I probably would have stayed one more season anyway. I probably wasn't ready to take the job. I think Ben Johnson was hoping the Bears job was going to become available in 2024, and it didn't. And I have a feeling, I have no evidence that this is the case, but I have a feeling he may not have wanted to go to Washington. The power structure there, maybe it was a Jaden Daniels issue with the number 2 pick. Whatever it was, I think things were close with Washington, but it wasn't quite right. And that's why he ended up going back to Detroit for one more season. Chicago opened up. He walked right through the door. So I think Ben Johnson in January of 2024 would have taken the Bears job. And I think, honestly, he was ready at that point. He had been under Dan Campbell's wing for a few years. He had understood how Campbell created that culture. So I don't have an issue with that. Now, in terms of your questions about the quarterback, and my stance is the same that it was that I argued about then. The Hall is the wrong choice. Unless you rank your quarterbacks, you always take your top quarterback, whoever it is, if that opportunity presents itself. If Jaden Daniels was your top quarterback and you were confident that you were going to trade and a team was picking Caleb Williams and you could trade to number 2 or whoever and take Jaden Daniels, fine. But you also don't want to risk it. So you may sit there and just say, no, we're going to stick at 1 and pick Jaden Daniels. You have to do the assessment on all the top quarterbacks. Are you listening, Ryan Poles? Don't laugh people off the field because they sat there and said, well, Drake May is worth looking at. No, you assess everyone. You assess them on the field. You assess them off the field. And you find out who you rank your quarterback prospects. We have this guy first, this guy second. You had so many great, you mentioned them in your question, between Bo Nix and you didn't even mention Penix, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, Jaden Daniels. You had other options. Assess them all. See who they are at quarterback. And if you sit there and say, Bo Nix is our guy, and you want to trade down to 7 or 8 and draft Bo Nix, because damn it, that is who I think is going to be the best quarterback out of that bunch, and that's what you do. It's not what I would do. I don't agree with that. I assessed these quarterbacks because I knew the Bears were going to be drafting in the top 3 in this draft during the college football season the year before. So when I looked at it, I assessed these guys, and to me, the best guy was Caleb Williams. So I would stay at 1. I would pick Caleb Williams. Now, I understand that Ryan Poles did just exactly that. The issue with Ryan Poles isn't that his conclusion was that Caleb Williams was the best guy for the Bears to take. The problem was that he concluded it without assessing the other quarterbacks. That's the issue. It goes back to Mitch Trubisky and Ryan Pace, where he did not assess Deshaun Watson. Didn't look at him. Wasn't interested. You can't do that when you're going to pick a quarterback. You got to look at everybody. Ryan Poles didn't do that. He shrugged his shoulders. Now, he may have shrugged his shoulders and gotten the right guy, and that might save his job, might keep him around for a long time. But that doesn't mean the process was done properly. I would do the process properly. And if my conclusion, again, I didn't get a chance to talk to these quarterbacks. I didn't get a chance to interview people who know these quarterbacks. I just looked at what I saw on the football field. And what I saw on the football field was that Caleb Williams was the best quarterback prospect out of this group. So from what the knowledge I had, I would take Caleb Williams. I would hire Ben Johnson. And I believe that Ben Johnson would have taken the Bears job a year earlier. And then I would take my time machine and I would work on some, bigger issues that my time machine could help me with, other than just fixing the Chicago Bears. So let's get to the prediction. Bears and Raiders. I think this one is going to be fun. I think this one can see some points again. Depends on which Geno Smith shows up. But I think the Bears are going to win this one. Jason Fitz, I was on the fence. Honestly, when I started this podcast, I was on the fence. I wasn't sure exactly which way I was going to go on the prediction and thought it was pretty close to a 50-50 game. But when a Raider fan who knows the Raiders well says, I think the Bears are going to win, damn it, I'm going with them. Bears are going to win this one. I think we're going to see some points. I say the Bears win this one by a final score of 31-24. We see some points. We see some points from the Raiders, but we see another really good game from Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, and they go back back-to-back in terms of getting 30 points on the board. It'll be a beautiful thing to see. I don't know if Caleb Williams throws for 300 yards. I don't know if Caleb Williams throws for 4 touchdowns, but I do think Caleb Williams has another very good game. 31-24. The Bears are victorious. They get to 2-2, and they start turning this season on their head, and we'll see what happens as they march forward. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We'll talk to you next week. Bear down, everybody. Adios.